I will start then. Morning. You are having to take on myself today, who who will be doing a quick gamble through a history of food and class in that sense. Basically, because this started with me reading a book by Pen Vogler, and who is a very good writer, wrote a book called Scoff, which I would recommend to anybody to read because it is a damn good book. I found it in the history section of Oxfam bookshop, which I thought, but it's a book of food and drink. It should be in the food section. But no, the manager said it's history, so it goes in the history section. Okay, right. We take it for granted that more choice and refinement in food comes with money and social prestige. And that is so true if you look at food in the past, that what if you were very poor, what you could find, and what you were rich, what you could find, and how you ate your meals, how you associated with people. It's quite complex and interesting. Yeah. I thought that sounds good. Right, a bit of this, and it won't go for too long. But as I gradually got into it, I found that the subject is vast and all of it interesting. So I could be sitting, if I wanted to, I could be sitting here for hours telling you about these things that I found out. But no, as I said, this is a quick gamble through some amusing facts that I found. And one of them was, what sort of meat did we eat in the past? And so I looked back, and the Normans, that's quite a long time ago. I was quite surprised at this to find out that what they eat was roast boar, venison, pheasant, hare, crane, heron, seal, and porpoise. You kind of think, crane, heron, seal, and porpoise. Wonder what they taste like. Would it be any good? Would I like them? But that is the thing. But you may ask why, in this island with 30 odd million people, sheep is impossible. 36 million sheep. Is it impossible to buy mutton from your local butcher or from a supermarket? And why is it that Cornish pasty survives? So what happens to venison pasty or pigeon pies of 2 centuries ago? And are we a bit sniffy when it comes to actually poor people? Poor people should eat this and that, while those of a wealthy kind that are allowed to do what? And George Orwell, in his book, there are always some cheap, pleasant thing to tempt you. Let's have 3 penneth of chips. Run out and buy a 2-penny ice cream. Put the kettle on. We'll have a nice cup of tea. This is how your mind works. White bread and marge and sugared tea don't nourish you to any extent, but they're nicer. Mm. At least most people think so. than brown bread and dripping and cold water, which I think is very true in that sense. Well, let's start with breakfast. You would think that a poor person would start with porridge in the morning, but think about the utensils which are being used on this. Because if you're a poor person, you can only buy a very thin tin pot to cook in. And if it's porridge, it will burn the bottom before, if it's very thin, the heat, you can't control the heat. So there you go. So you're most likely to have bread and maybe a bit of fat from the meat that you had a few days ago. But at the other end of the scale, breakfast was bread, honey, butter, boiled eggs, goat's cheese, and venison pasty, and lots of tea. You may rise at 8 o'clock in the morning, spend a few hours writing letters and other social things, and eat around 10 o'clock. But of course, in some upper class households, there was kitchari and deviled kidneys, and the cook would have lots of homemade jams had with the toast. Kitchari, as you would know, is curried, and curried deviled kidney is curried also. And this comes from the fact that many of the bigger families would have spent some time in India, some time away. So they would get used to such things like this, and you'd have them on the table. So next bit, and he's going to read. Right. And now we come to a little etiquette of what to do at dinners. Etiquette diners are reminded to wipe their hands on their napkins, not on their hair, clothes, or the bread. And if necessary, use them for blowing their noses with, rather than use a tablecloth. You might also use a towel and have to wash the grease of the dinner from your hands by dipping them in a bowl, rinsing them even under a stream of water provided by a server with a pitcher. Washing your hands before a meal wasn't important. We know that if you look back at historical times, you'll see tablecloths and family silver and this type of thing. So Henry Hutton, commissioned by his widow around 1596, shows his life and its accomplishments, and shows a feast in which the male diners have white napkins thrown over their left shoulders. The use of napkins by diners began to be codified in the way that it is carried on today. Tucking a napkin into the collar so that it really protects the clothes became a working class stereotype. The middle and uppers preferred to hide it and its function on their laps. Napkin rings, and if you remember, some people in childhood had napkin rings. They each had your name upon it. And so at least you were communing with only your own germs. Folding a napkin at the end of the meal would imply the same, so you should leave it open on the table or on your chair when you nipped out. As it once served the same function as a fork, the napkin is still also found on the left of the palate. The Victorians loved to hide a piece of bread, a bread roll in its folds. So, if you were identified as the wrong type and you took your napkin and flipped it out, you would shoot a bread roll right into your hostess's lap, which I found was rather amusing. Going on to another thing, which I found amusing and somewhat interesting, was the rise of tinned food. And this is quite the thing of the past, because not used to have bottled food, and then tinned food came after that. The poet John Betjeman was not a fan of tinned food. And at one point in his poem, he said, tinned food, tinned meat, tinned beans, tinned mines, which I thought was, yes, maybe. But tinned food, instead of bottles, were the first tinned food factory was in Bermondsey, which began to produce more basic provisions than those envisaged by others. A combination of beef, mutton, and vegetables. Almost immediately, the factory was supplying quantities to the Navy in 1813. The Duke of Wellington praised the preserved beef made by the firm of Dorking, Hall, and Gamble. The sailors quickly christened their rations of bouillon, or boiled bully beef. Tin food was taken on exhibitions, and the lordly Sir Joseph Banks, celebrated botanist and long-time president of the Royal Society, professed himself very happy to recommend the firm's embalmed produces in 1817. But tinned food was not immediately a hit in civilian life. Though cans were thick and heavy and had to be opened with a hammer and chisel, until the first rudimentary can opener was invented around 1855. And sadly, the contents, if not properly sealed, had become putrid. Fancy opening something like that. Not very pleasant. Mm-hmm. Of course, one has to say something about the fork. First seen in Anglo-Saxon times, and one was very rare, and it's very rare to find one of these days, because they usually are made out of copper alloy. And the first came as a serving implement, because before this, when you were carving a joint, you would hold it with one hand and carve. And so you had the big serving forks, which came. And Samuel Pepys tells us that in a lot of meals he went to, people came with their own set of cutlery.
Oh, yeah.
Suggesting that people did not trust the host to have clean implements. At the time, when the third time came into play, the middle class had to show they had social cachet. Sheffield started to make and sell a lot of cutlery at affordable prices around 1914, which you could then buy. And I don't think at the moment we will go into the struggle of, if you were a certain class, trying desperately to eat peas with your knife. But now, if you want to buy cutlery, you can get a 24-piece cutlery set made in China for under £10. Right. Now, let us consider the oyster, where in 1837 in Whitechapel, it was considered to be very much the poor person's food. The Dickens character, Sam Weller, said that Mr. Pickwick, quote, bless him if he don't think that a very man's very poor, and he rushes out for his lodgings and eats oysters in regular desperation. In the end of the cheap oyster came when in 1902 in Emsworth, Hampshire, the council flooded a sewage system to release untreated sewerage over the local beds of fresh Emsworth oysters. And these were supplied to do different banquets, causing sickness for all those who ate them, and 4 deaths, including the Dean of Winchester, who died after contracting typhoid. Oof. So, but yet now we think of oysters as a food of the wealthy. When was the last time you had and were able to pay and happy to pay for 12 oysters in a restaurant? It was expensive somewhat. Where we are. Vegetables. Here's a big subject. In the 16th century, a surprising vegetable started to be grown in Britain, which came from Europe. And it was called the cauliflower. No one had found it wasn't grown, like a lot of vegetables, wasn't grown in England at the time. And if you look at the carrot, which we have today, nice, orange, very tasty. Before this, the carrot was yellow, large, very stringy, and had to be boiled quite a lot to be edible. But now, hey, celery and courgettes were eaten in Europe, but not in England. And aubergines and avocados didn't come near our shores for at least 100 years. These are kind of new things which we forget that, about this occasionally. The birthright of the humble ploughman and his family was a diet of unrefined grains, barley, oats, and too of also onions, leeks, and garlics, and cabbage, and spring greens, and the occasional potato. But as you can imagine, this was a fairly flatulent diet. And Did you have friends in those times? Or if you did you just think, well, yeah, yes, it's Josiah, he's ate too many of those, right, too many of those leeks in his diet. As meat was very expensive and could only be brought in on high days and at Christmas, where the meat prominently for those at those times was a goose. Always had a goose. I had one at Christmas where I was invited. Charles and Festina were cooking a goose at that time, and I hadn't had one for years and years and years and years. And it's quite remarkable the difference between turkeys and goose and geese. I'm just going to say gooses, but there you go. The doctor, Anna Kingsford, who wrote a book about food in France, as she had to go there to get her doctor's degree because she wasn't allowed to get one in England. So she took her degree in France. And I am informed of this, and I don't know if it's true or not. Other friends may know. But at that time, it was illegal for women to study medicine in England. And you think, what? That's just silly. But there you go. She was just describing laborers in Mexico, India, and Japan, where she went, who lived on foods such as rice, tortillas, chickpeas, and lentils, and hardly or never ate meat, who were robustly strong and healthy. It was only the coming of stir fries, dal, vegetable curries, and falafels that has made vegan diet become very mainstream today, which is quite surprising. But this is where I come to one of those stop points that I think this is bigger than I thought it was going to be. I could spend a whole hour on the subject of bread, but we would only spend a few minutes on this now, because perhaps with the indulgence of Patsy, I might be able to produce another talk on things like bread, butter, cheese, and this type of thing, which deserves a whole hour on its own because it is fascinating.
Yeah.
Especially as Napoleon said, how can you conquer a country which has over 400 different cheeses? I like that. Now, in feudal times, the mill and the bakehouse were part of the Lord of the Manor's estate. As the oil in wheat germ grows rancid after a small while, so people were obliged to, if they wanted bread or grain, the people were obliged to return to the local miller to have their fresh grown flour, ground flour, and he gave it back to you, minus a tithe for him and for the landlord. As you can see, this gave rise to a lot of dodgy practice. White bread was given to those of the upper class because it was white, and it was looked upon as the pure, as in white, virgin, all that lot. Brown for those below them, Well, it changed from today's tastes.
Mm. Mm.
And I'm one of those who poo-poos a bit of the sliced bread because I like my bread a bit chunky. But there you go. But when people go to France and eat the bread over there, where you go to your boulanger and get bread, I think with all the different breads out there, the word quickly is mon Dieu. There is a lot of different sorts out there, which I will add something else, which is a very large subject, and that is tea. Right thing, very British thing. Have a go at tea. No,
Me?
comes from India, China.
Sorry.
That's where your tea comes from. But I will say only a few moments on that at the moment. It is thought that Catherine of Braganza brought her love of tea when she married Charles II in 1662. It was quickly adapted by the court of ladies and gentlemen as a non-intoxicating alternative to the small ales and wine, which were standard wholesome beverages when water was not routinely safe enough to drink. Because uh, men and women, and even at the very low class level, drank beer more. That it was called small beer, and because it was safer than drinking the water. And if you go to a friend's house and you look at some of the historical documents there, boarding school children, it is on the menu. Small beer is on the menu for boarding school children, which is quite remarkable in that sense. These shoots back to the book. And here's something which I found totally amusing. In his essay eliciting Tea's most ardent love letter from Samuel Johnson, who described himself as a hardened and shameless tea drinker, who relied on it to stimulate his considerable intellectual powers, and his kettle scarcely had time to cool, who with tea amused the evening, and with tea solicited the midnights, and with tea welcomed the morning. Johnson pours ridicule on Hayward's argument except for one. He believed that it was unsuitable for the lower classes of people. They didn't need to stimulate intellectual endeavors, and it supplied no strength for labor or beneficial medical efforts. Dr. Johnson, along with Colley Cibber, Orson, Powell, Pope, Cowper, Coleridge, and Sidney Smith, eulogized tea as a drink for the thinking classes, an integral part of the life of the coffee shops, just as the aristocracy were abandoning the open and egalitarian coffee houses in order to form their own members' clubs. Everybody worried about the exorbitant cost of tea, except, of course, for the exchequer, for which it was a boom. The expense put all those who claimed that tea was a necessary intellectual stimulant into a quandary. If they insisted it should not be drunk by lower income labourers, was it inconsistent of them to complain that the hefty duty, sometimes as high as 160%, made it a luxury and not an essential? Interesting, I thought. As I said, I'd like to return to this subject at a later date with a title like Tea, Bread, Butter and Cheese.
Yes.
Anyway, I know it's a bit of time, but I come near to what I wanted to say. But one of my very favourite foods is the pork pie. I love a pork pie. Hot crust, hot water crust pastry, hand risen over a substantial chunks of chopped fresh and well fatted pork, and let no cook forget the savoury jelly. The first pies, or pork spelt P-Y-E-S, were in William Ellis's book, Country House Wife's Family Companion, 1750. Who has heard of meddlers? Anybody? Ah, one, two. Well
Who has
done,
heard
mate.
what?
Meddlers.
The medlars, yes.
Medlors. This fruit, I remember because an old aunt had a tree in her garden, and
Yeah.
they had to become rotten before they were made into jams or a form of marmalade.
Mm.
But what's a jam and marmalade? Oh, very sweet, and to a young person, exceedingly nice. But I never got to have them in a lot of cases. But there you go. It's one of those things that we have. But what I would like to ask friends at the moment, because this is where uh, where this is where you come. But I will ask you that in a moment. But there's just something I had forgotten, and I thought it was a very good point. Is the statement when a person of lower levels is below the sort. Have you heard that one?
No.
No, it is an old-fashioned thing, which means you are sitting on the lower table than the people are that are slightly on the higher table. And the reason for that one, which I found out after a bit of research, is that in olden times, salt was expensive, and it was put into big silver containers, and only the richer people had these silver containers. And if you were, as that phrase now, below the sort, you had wooden dishes which may have uh, only a few grains in them, and that became known as, that became as a phrase now, you were below the salt. That means you were lesser than the lords and ladies and all that lot. But this is where, again, I say this is where you join in. What was or is your favourite food? Angela?
Well, it is going to be a bit rambling.
Okay.
I was born in April 1939, and so war started in September 1939. So we were incredibly poor. We were living, my dad was born in 1917, Hardy Road, in Hardy Road, Wimbledon. He was 14 Hardy Road. Fast forward 1939, I, Angela Valentine, was born in 14 Hardy Road, Wimbledon, the same house. You know, we were totally affected by war. So this is a bit of a tangent to what you've been saying, Ray. But in terms of food, and I would agree with you, you know, everything in the United Kingdom boils down to class and class getting a better deal. And look, this is again an aside, but it's about time we became the Republic of Great Britain, given that the richest, horriblest man was arrested by the police yesterday. And yeah, I won't go on any more about that. But in terms of food, growing up in the Second World War, in the country, very rural Kent, I can remember Mum and my nan, my dad's mum always lived with us, picking rose hips, and we would take them to the clinic, the NHS clinic, and we would get a little bottle of rose hip syrup for our vitamin C. I can remember going blackberry picking in the autumn and Nanny and Mum making blackberry jam, loads of it. I mean, you didn't throw away a jam jar. And strawberry jam, I can remember going strawberry picking in Kent, because Kent was the garden of England. And we would be picking the strawberries to be made into strawberry jam, which would be sold. And we were allowed to, it would be weighed, we were allowed to collect the strawberries that weren't perfect. And then we would take them home, and then you would get a sugar ration at some point. I suppose it would be in the autumn. And Nanny and Mum would make strawberry jam. Now, one of the unfairnesses of my life as a child is that Dad was the only one allowed to eat this strawberry jam. We had to have inferior jam. So don't tell me about class. Sorry, that's me finished. That's my memories of food. Oh no, one more thing. After the war, in Ashford, food was rationed, and we had to buy food from joint stock bakers. So the van would come round, and I think it would even come down Bromley Green Road, and my nan would be moaning that pre-war bread cost a penny three farthings. Look at the price now. So sorry, I could go on forever. I won't say any more though.
No, that's right. What is your favourite food today? What is your indulgence, Angela?
Well, I don't eat meat. My dad, I think as a family, animal fat doesn't seem to agree with us. My dad said, growing up, he remembers his grandma saying to his mum, "Ooh, he doesn't like meat, does he? We have to give him something else." And I found, I mean, we could never afford much meat, but I found if I had too much animal fat, when I got to bed, I would probably be sick. So I don't eat meat. And that's why, because I'm healthier by being vegetarian. Yeah, my daughter from Swansea came over and she likes gluten-free. So I had a recipe for lemony polenta cake, which I made her, and I gave most of her I gave it to her. So that's my favorite food at the moment, because I made it the other day and I've still got a few slices, lemony polenta cake, and it's gluten-free. And I think that's an aspect of food that as humans we have to consider what suits us and our bodies and our, with me it's my lungs always.
Mm.
So sorry, I've said too much.
Angela.
No, polenta is Italian, so that's very good. Hattie.
Yeah, Angela. I think the polenta cake might freeze very well in small portions, and you can allow yourself in the future.
Well, yeah, no. I made it for Iona, my daughter, and she took it back, and she took most of it back because, you know, she has to be very careful about gluten-free. I don't. I can eat, you know, I can eat. I made it for her. It was my present for her. Oh, and incidentally, her daughter, Marisa, she came over because her daughter, Marisa, had her 29th birthday. And for me, it's amazing that I've got a 60-year-old daughter and a 29-year-old, beautiful, wonderful granddaughter.
Wonderful,
Lovely.
wonderful.
So my favorite foods are apples. I mean, there's just so many varieties, and I miss them, you know, in the winter when mine have run out. Marianne's have nearly got to the end now. She only had 10 left yesterday. And, you know, it's lovely that she shares them, and she's got all sorts of different species. But I shall miss them after this, except that we go to the freezer and we get out lovely stewed apple with a few raisins in, and I no longer make crumbles. I mean, they're too calorific, really, and too sweet, but I can't be bothered either. But they are grand when they're around.
Yeah, lovely.
Yes, my gran had the apples with the raisins and cinnamon as well, which was very nice.
And a bit of ginger. I love crystallized ginger, so I buy a packet of 500 grams from Holland and Barrett. And excuse me, but it may sound a bit OTT, but I stand there and I chop them all smaller and put them in a little jar, just handy, so that I can tip them into whatever's going. Might even have one or two little nibbles of a piece of ginger at night, just to sort of stave off the nibbles.
Rosie.
My favorite food growing up was champ. Really simple dish made with mashed potato, and scallions, as we call them. You call them spring onions, or my husband said they were called gibbles in his household. I'd never heard that till I met him. But yes, so you could put the spring onions in the milk as you warmed it, and added that and the butter to the potato, and I could just sit and eat a whole bowl of that. I think with the encouragement of the home economics teacher at school, who encouraged us to educate your palate, girls. You never know where you're going to be in the world. And of course, having travelled and so on in my adult life, I have lots of favourite dishes now, but one of them would be a real indulgent truffle risotto. And I'm largely a pescatarian, so I do like a lot of fish, and vegetarian lasagna, which I like to make myself.
Rosie?
Yes?
I heard you say chocolate risotto. Chocolate risotto?
No, truffle.
Oh, right. Okay.
Sorry.
Carry on.
I think we need to append some recipes on this talk. I'd certainly like to know one or two of those. Sound really good. Especially the mashed potato. I used to love mashed potato. we didn't make it in that way, but I still loved it. I mean, for me, the big thing was the butter
Oh
because
yeah.
butter was so, very hard to come by after the war. And, I think I probably got an extra share, being an only child and sport. And but I've always remembered the flavour, and I've not been able to replicate it myself. When I do mashed potato, I try. I cannot get quite the flavour that I remember of mashed potato, onion. We didn't even have black pepper, so it would have been white pepper, um, and butter that my mother used to achieve. But I can only imagine its memory playing tricks on me. But that was a very, very beautiful food. Really lovely.
Mm. I discovered a while ago that I am gluten and lactose intolerant, and that they were not doing my gut any good.
Mm.
That was a few years before I had blood clot that went to my lungs. And I think that was as a result of contributed to by fatty foods. So, if Ray asks what favorite foods are, there's my grandfather was a greengrocer, was a grocer in Folkestone, and he was quite a large man. And because he loved having a nibble of, it's just so easy to cut a little bit of cheese off and nibble it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that I seem to have acquired that genetically as a love of cheese, but I now have to forego that because of lactose intolerance. So at the moment I do, and I was also kind of prescribed that I should eat by naturopaths that fish was good for me. So I do a very nice line in stir fries of various forms of fish.
Mm.
And I fry them in, so you have to find a good oil. I tend to fry them in ghee, which is Indian clarified butter, which is it's made from milk. It's the non-lactosey bit of the milk. So there you go. And when you were talking about implements, Ray, I couldn't help but think of I eat my peas with honey. I've done it all my life. It makes the peas taste funny, but it keeps them on the knife, which is, and I looked that up because it's attributed to various people, but apparently it's traditional. It's old enough to be traditional. It wasn't Spike Milligan in it.
No, that's who it's attributed to, but it's not, as you say. It goes back further than that. But I can imagine it goes back in time when I say there wasn't forks around, where you had a knife which is kind of a kind of dagger looking, and you use your bread as well to somehow work all this round. And there's such a difference today, though we do use bread. We have bread a lot more today than we have had in the past. We eat all different sorts of breads. That's what I was saying earlier, that it's a vast subject, and it just fascinates me how the development of that and the coming of German breads, the rye breads, and the Spanish breads, it's all different types of ones, and lots of different French breads. If you go into a boulanger and you see, especially in France, you see all this vast array of things, and
Yeah.
I remember first having a what is it? A very light bruschette. I think that's how you pronounce it. And that was, kind of, I was kind of, wow, what's this? It's blinging good. And that's why I would like to revisit that at some time, as a kind of, and have you any, because I've got time to ask this, that type of thing, have you any favourite cheeses?
It probably shows I have an underdeveloped palate because the cheese I like best is the very strongest cheddar I can lay my hands on. It used to be the Canadian cheddars used to be the strongest. But they seem to have sort of mellowed. Again, how much is one's palate, and how much is that cheese? If anyone knows of a stronger cheddar cheese, I should be delighted to hear of it because that is my favourite, a really strong cheddar cheese.
Well, just the co-op in the Gloucester Road does sell quite a good range of cheese. I don't know whether you go, it can get to that particular co-op, but their prices are usually very good. So I would say if you can get to the co-op in the Gloucester Road, it's well worth looking at what they have, and their prices are usually, I think, quite good.
Is that which there's two, aren't there, co-ops on Gloucester Road?
It's the one. Sorry to interrupt. It's the one that's newly built. So
yes, I know
it's
them.
higher up. The other co-op, I think, is being redeveloped, and it's closed at the moment. So it's the new one. And if you have got a car, there is a car park, definitely. But
I must admit to a great love of a Stilton. Like a Stilton.
Very much.
But the most, but Hattie?
You must have been to I couldn't make out the rest of the words.
Stilton. Stilton
right.
cheese?
Yeah.
Do you like Stilton cheese? No.
Nope.
Oh, no.
But I do like the herb and garlic one. It gets finished very quickly.
Yeah.
David.
Well, I would. It's unfortunate. It's a nostalgia time because I don't think if you're walking, then a nice chunk of cheddar in a stick of bread is hard to beat, and I'm that's gluten and lactose at the same time, so it's sort of off my list. But I just remember the baguette was invented by Napoleon, apparently, because it was a stick of bread that you could stick down your trousers, and his armies marched with a baguette. They carried their bread with them as a loaf of bread stuffed down the trousers. It's an interesting thing. And on Ray's mention of class and oysters, I grew up in Whitstable, which was always famous for its oysters.
Oh, yeah.
And it used to have a very large oyster fishing fleet. At its peak, 120 odd boats, all in the oyster fisheries. And as I grew up, there were two oyster boats left. And they were part of the local, it was part of your local knowledge, because whether the tide was coming in or going out, you could tell from which direction the oyster boats were pointing.
Yeah.
And that gave you an indication of, if the water was out on the mudflats, at least if the oyster boats were pointing our way, that meant the tide was coming in, so you wouldn't have to wait so long before there was water for swimming. So the oyster, and having grown up there, it was much later in my life before I ever had my first oyster, even though I grew up in Whitstable.
Yes, I had oysters. I have had oysters. I can't say it was a real memorable thing, basically because at that time they'd become the really expensive type of things. It was only had them because I was dining with a parents of a friend who had a fair bit of money. Hattie,
I'm wondering about this question.
go on.
What have you either picked wild, like foraging, or scrumped or gleaned? Can you recall, I don't know, half a dozen or a dozen different things that you've collected with that feeling, I got those?
Well, growing up in Kent, scrumping apples was like, that was birthright, except that I had uncles who had their own orchards. So
Aha.
so you didn't have to nick apples because they were in the family. Oh, one thing, Hattie, just a quick technical note. I don't know if you realize that when you're having difficulty hearing, there you can turn on captions and actually get real-time text display of who's saying what, which can help when people have problems hearing.
Yeah. Interestingly, captions are down there and I'm lip reading up there. So it can be quite annoying.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and also, if I halve the distance from here, like down here, I've got 4 times the volume. So that's so easy and soundless to do. Sometimes Ray's microphone is very loud. It seems to vary like this sometimes, and that's very difficult for my hearing aids, so I turn them down.
There you go.
It's
Yeah.
it's a technical.
No easy answers then.
But
I
I have just had this wonderful piece of information this morning about the little thing down the bottom called hide captions, show captions, which I had never noticed before. And now I can actually see what everybody's saying. And it's absolutely wonderful because otherwise I've only been getting about 70% of what you've been saying and making up the other 30. So I expect some of the things I've been saying are really quite odd because I've been replying to something very slightly different.
There you go.
Sorry.
all my best friends are eccentric in some way, and I love them for it.
Well, that's actually true of everyone, isn't it? All the world's queer except thee and me, and
uh,
I'm not so sure about thee.
they, yes, yes, in that type of thing. But there's one thing which I had when I was quite young, but I was informed by my grandfather that it had been made in England for years and years and years, and because I've got a few minutes or so left, that was mead. Mead is a very, very English thing which goes back to uh, the monks of Lindisfarne and places like that, and I thought it was a modern thing that was being made. So my grandfather said, "No, silly boy, it was done bloody blah and bloody blah," and I went, "Oh." Sort of things you forget. You think, I know that, until someone else tells you, no, you're wrong. And parents and grandparents do that to people. But there you go. Well, I hope you have been amused with the highways and byways of food and class in England today. And I will hopefully come back to you with something more along those lines. So thank you for coming and listening today. Next week, David is going to come and talk to us. Tell me the title of your talk, David?
Good question, Ray. It was going to be called Solar on Several Million Roofs or something like that. And I discovered, quite to my own surprise, that I was plagiarizing my own title from a few weeks earlier, which is a bit, this is, a old age setting in or something. But in the meantime, in the last couple of weeks, the government has come out with its long-awaited local power plan. And I love it. It's a local energy plan, it's a local power plan. It's a plan for local power. And I'm going to talk about that because it's really exciting.
Thank you very much.
Right.
And thank you for coming. I will see you next week, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray.
Patsy and David.
Thank you, Ray.
Thanks, Ray.
Yeah, thank you
Patsy and
very much.
David, I would like to put a link to the talk in our local WhatsApp group.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good idea. Yeah.
So can I just copy I could just copy and paste the link that I've used. Yeah.
Yeah. And funnily enough, if the long way round, Hattie, is to go to any of the talks.
Yes.
Look at the description, scroll down, find the cumulative playlist, and then click on that. And as soon as I publish the talk, it will appear on the cumulative playlist. And then you can click on that and you've got the link. But it will be up fairly shortly.
Yeah.
I'll leave that in the recording so people can.
So I'm going to send it to SOSWAT. They may not publish it. They may not send it out on email, but also the street.
Lovely.
Yeah.
And note that in recent months, weeks, I've been using ChatGPT to work up summaries of talks and put them in the description, and it's got a better attention span than me, and it comes up with very nice descriptions. So I always look forward to seeing what it comes up with, and I enjoy putting it in below the talks for other people to get a good flavour of what the talks are about. So
it's very good. Yeah, it's very good. Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
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 Hope your wrist is.
Oh yes.
Good for soon.
Hopefully, it will get better too.
Yeah. Cheers, Ray.
Hope so. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.